it's Kirsten with the Wooden Butterfly, where we're all about the transformation. And today we're transforming a very outdated china cabinet into not one, but two different projects. So come along so you can see this entire piece transform. So when I saw this china cabinet on Facebook Marketplace, I knew this was going to be perfect. I have been looking for something to house my grandbaby's toys in our family room for quite some time, and I couldn't find anything that was quite the right size. I couldn't have anything too large, and then I either found something too small or too large. So, and it needed to be up off the floor because there's a vent in the area where a floor vent in the area that I needed it to go. So when I saw this, I knew it was going to be perfect because I had an idea separating the two pieces and using the bottom and then the top. But I also did a challenge for the furniture flipping teacher. So I knew this was going to be perfect. Follow through to the end so that you can see where both pieces reside right now. So this is what it looked like once I popped that top off of it. This is where we're left with that 70s beauty. I'm using Up Paint in the colors Deep Anchor, Green Escape, Greige, and Coconut Cover. I also use their brush to blend with as well. As you can see, those 4 holes right there are where the screws were holding the top piece on. So let's get started. First, I took off all the doors. I was wondering if this molding would come off fairly easy. And I want to encourage you to, when you look at a piece like this, please don't discard it because there are some gems that you will find inside. I was thinking that I was going to have to go to the hardware store and buy some plywood to build new doors because I wanted a sleeker look, something without so much detail. And kind of this bubble molding just wasn't going to have it. Lo and behold, there were screws that held the front on. So now all I had to do was remove the screws and the top popped right off and I have a nice flat surface to work with. Now we can go ahead and clean the piece inside and out. You want to scrub it down really good first and then rinse it really well. I'm using a TSP based cleaner to remove any dirt, grime, cobwebs, and whatever else that there was left in the piece. I'm using Bondo all-purpose putty to fill in any of those holes that were left from the screws. The reason why I love using this product is, well, the fumes are not so great, so wear a mask, but I love how it hardens very fast and it also sands really smooth. And you usually don't have to apply more than 2 coats. 2 coats usually because there'll be little cracks and crevices, which you'll see in just a second. But just add that hardener to it and make sure you mix it really, really well. Now you also have to work really fast because it does dry within just a few minutes. I'm using just a tongue depressor, something I can just go ahead and throw out, and a scrap piece of wood to mix it up on. It's really hard to get, once this hardens, it's hard to get off, so I like to just use something I can dispose of afterwards. And then using my DeWalt cordless orbital sander with 150 grit sandpaper to remove the excess Bondo, as well as I'm giving the entire thing a scuff sand so that the wood has a little more tooth to it to adhere that bonding primer. Parts of this were real wood and parts of it were particle board with some sort of laminate. I don't think it's a wood laminate on the front. So we went ahead and filled all those holes in the front of those doors as well. And then I mixed up just a little bit more to fill in any of those other little cracks and crevices after we sanded it down. Now it's time for Zinsser Bullseye 123 Primer. This is a bonding primer that is phenomenal. It's water-based and goes on really nicely and evenly. I'm using a 4-inch foam roller to roll this on the entire piece. And then I go back over lightly just to smooth out any ridge marks or whatnot that may have been left by the roller. We want a nice smooth consistency because whatever is underneath is just going to be amplified on the top. And I am a stickler for a nice smooth surface. So you're just going to add this to the entire piece and the inside. You'll have to do a little bit of yoga and a little bit of gymnastics to get in there. Now we're using a all-purpose tool to cut away parts of the legs that were at the base. In order to add the legs that I wanted to add, we had to take parts of it off and then build it back up again with wood. So this is a 2x6 and then there's another 1x4 added on top of that so that we could actually add the braces for the legs and get them in the spots that we needed. You'll notice my husband helping for just a minute because I was short on time and I needed an extra set of hands real quick. In the package, these legs I bought off of Amazon, and of course that and all of the tools that I used are linked in the description. I am using the coconut cover, the metallic paint, and I wet the piece first so that it gave kind of a wash to the legs so that the wood grain would still shine through. And then once it's dry, you just go ahead and screw those into place. And then of course clean off the bottom so when you flip it over, it isn't such a mess. But then I mixed together the deep anchor in the green escape. I wanted 8 ounces of paint, so I filled up to the 4-ounce line first and then the 8-ounce line. And then you stir it really, really well. You want to make sure you get both colors mixed all the way through, and it creates this beautiful teal color, which is a hint as to what's in my living room. I'm going to use that color to paint the inside, so there's a pop of color on the inside. I would have painted the outside this color, but there's already a lot of it in the room, so I just wanted a little bit. While that dried, I went ahead and I measured 1.5 inches from each side of each one of the doors so that I could add the molding. I sketched out a box with a pencil on there and then measured each side so that I can measure the molding. I'm using these cobalt miter snips that again are linked in the description, and they work really well for cutting just this small molding. Sometimes if you take it out to a miter saw, it'll just obliterate it because it's just too powerful, where these snips cut it really nicely. See, a nice clean crisp edge. So now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the front section that did not remove. There's no hinges on this section. Later on, we are going to take this part out and then add hinges. We just, I ran out of time and I said, well, I'm just going to call it and just leave it solid for right now. Why on earth they would leave that solid and not put hinges on it, I really don't know. But like I said, they did some wonky things during this time period. But we definitely will add hinges there later on so that all 3 doors open and it'll be a lot more accessible to the inside. So I'm just doing the same process. I drew the box and then measured the molding, and I'm adding it on with a cordless nail gun. That again, linked in the description. I use 1 1/4 inch brad nails, And it is a little bit tricky with the molding since it is curved, and I had to shoot the nail through the thickest section, but it can be done. And then I'm using the fast dry DAP caulk to fill in all the holes. Normally I would have used a wood putty, but again, we were short on time and I was out of wood putty. So going to the store right now just wasn't in the books. Now we get to the fun part, the painting part. So I did a second coat on the inside, and now I'm adding the grayish to the outside. I'm using really long brush strokes to do 2 sections. And then you'll see where I take, after the second section is done, I come back through and do really long brush strokes so that you don't see a bunch of short, choppy ones. They'll be nice and long, and for the most part, most of the brush strokes leveled right out. This paint it covers really well, it's nice and creamy, and it seems to bond really well and is quite durable. So overall, I'm very excited about the paint. It is a recycled paint, so you actually can turn in your unused gallons of paint and they will recycle it and turn it into either chalk paint, metallic, and they have latex paint as well. I'm using a chiseled angled brush from Zebra. This I love it because it holds a lot of paint, it adds a lot of cover, but you can also get into all of those nooks and crannies really nicely. I'm adding a base coat to the entire piece, even though you'll see the surprise in just a minute. There will be some blending being done to the bottom, and the metallic paint is a little more transparent than the chalk paint, so it needs a base of something underneath it, so other than just the primer, so that you don't need as many coats. I guess that's where I'm going with that. So I'm using the same technique I always do. I have a slightly damp brush. I don't use a whole lot of paint on my brush, but just lay it on there. Now we'll blend the coconut cover that I put on the legs, remember? And you'll need 3 different brushes. I'm using the up paint brush, chalk paint brush to blend with, and then I'm using 2 Zebra brushes to apply the paint. This first panel is done already, and now we're going to go on and add the grayish to the top portion of the door. Well, that's the false door, that is. And I'm just pointing out there that they're just set in there. The hinges are not applied at this particular moment because you don't want to sit there and dance around hinges. When you're blending, you're going to be moving the paint around a lot, and they would just get in the way. So these are just set into place. They're not actually fastened. So again, I'm just applying that grayish to the top half of the door. This would basically be our second coat. I always recommend applying 2 coats of any paint that you use. The first coat covered very well, but I always recommend, we are human, we're going to miss a spot, or we're going to have it thinner or thicker in some areas, as well as it gives that little extra durability to your paint as well. Now we're going on to add the metallic, the coconut cover. It's a really pretty bronze color. It has a slight gold tint to it, but it's quite bronzy, and that's what I thought would be really pretty together with the teal it really pops. And I have that teal color throughout my room. So I'm just going ahead and I'm just laying the paint on there. It does not matter which way your brush strokes go. It does not matter how you get it on there. You just want some color laid there, because afterwards you're going to see that we're going to blend those colors together anyways. Now we're going to take a continuous mister bottle and you're going to lightly mist where you're blending those colors together. I'm using that up paint mineral chalk paint brush, sorry, to blend those two colors together. So I'm going horizontal first, and then I'll go vertical, and then I'll go diagonal, and you just keep blending and blending and blending until you get it where it feels right to you. I like to blend until it is a soft, gradual line or almost invisible line between the two colors. So like I said, it's just horizontal, it's vertical, it's diagonal, and you're just going to keep blending until those colors look right to you. You can then add a little more of the lighter color, or you could add a little bit of the darker color. It doesn't matter. I actually have a tutorial of the basics of how to blend with paint. So if you would like to get that, you can click the link in the description. You'll also want to keep a paper towel or a rag handy so that you can take any paint that might have loaded up onto the brush. And you want to dry brush for one, as well as you don't want that paint to build up on there, because then you're just moving lots of paint around and it gets super muddy. So you really want to remove any of that excess paint that builds up on your blending brush. When I'm blending, I really like to use a brush that is really dense and has soft bristles. That way the lines between the two colors blend really softly. There are several ways that different people blend. This is just my particular style. Like I'm very tactile, so I like a very smooth surface, as I said before, and I like a very smooth, gradual gradient between the two colors. So here, let me remind you of what it was before, and there it is after. I added some knobs that I had in my stash just to add a little bit of gold bling. And there's those beautiful legs on the bottom. Well, I think it came out great, and I think it'll be perfect for my grandbaby's toys, and it fits with the aesthetic of our family room. Now we're going to go on and we're going to see how the top came out. It's something really fun. Stay to the end so you can see the whole thing together. All right, let's get started on the top section. So our first step is to go ahead and remove the screws that are holding on those embellishments on the top. The awesome part about this piece is with just a few screws removed, those embellishments come off super easy. So we're not removing glue and, having to do major disassembling or cutting or anything. They just pop right off. Oh my gosh, look how much better that looks already. Oh, I love it. Then from there, we're going to go ahead and remove all of the hardware to remove the door, and we're going to pop that glass out as well, and any other hardware that's on there. And then taking off, just prying some of those staples out with a screwdriver to
pop the back off. And I'll tell you why in just a little bit. We have something fun we're going to do so that we need the back off. Now the next step, go ahead, grab some white lightning, spray that on there, scrub it with a scrubby brush, and then rinse with clear water. Then wipe down with a rag. Making sure you're getting into all the nooks and crannies. Now it's time to prime. We did give this a light scuff sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. And then I'm adding Zinsser Bin 123. It's a bonding primer and stain blocker as well, but I'm using it mainly for the bonding purposes with this piece because it is made out of several different types of materials. On the side is a paneling with some sort of coating. The back is paneling, but yet there are parts of it that are wood as well. So it's just better to prime the entire thing. I'm using a roller to apply the primer to the back panel. And then up here at the top there was a hole where the light was, but we're not using the light this time around, so I am just plugging that with, actually this was a chair leg that I cut off and it fit perfectly, so I just popped that right in there. And you're going to see my cute little hammer that I love to use all the time. It's just so handy. Then after that is glued in place, we're going to mix up some Bondo. This is all-purpose Bondo. It dries very quickly, so you got to work in small amounts. But we're going to fill those holes at the top where the screws were holding the embellishments. Then I grabbed my Flexio 5000 to spray the inside. The inside's going to be green. It's a lovely sage green color. It's a mixture of Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint in the color kudzu, drop cloth, and a little bit of kernel mustard. I am spraying the inside because it was just going to be easier to get all those little nooks and crannies, and that's another reason, one of the reasons why we took the back off, so that we could get to all of those areas a whole lot easier. Just make sure that you mask off the glass. So this is the back of the china cabinet. I am wanting to put on some of this wallpaper, and it looks like grass cloth. It has a texture to it, and this is the paintable kind, and it's also pre-pasted. I just picked it up at Lowe's, and I've never used the pre-pasted kind before, so I'm kind of anxious to see how this is going to come out, because this is the first step in what we're going to do with the back of this, because I want that to stand out and be a statement. So the sides and everything will be fairly neutral, and then the back I want to be a statement. Okay, so let's try this. First thing you're going to want to do is measure out your pieces. We're going to need 2 and then a little more, so we'll need 3 pieces cut. Okay, so what it says to do is to roll it up backwards. So that the print or your pattern is facing inward and the paste is on the outside. Now, ideally, if you had something that was the exact length, that would be better. I'm using this tub because it's what I had, but they do make wallpaper tubs. You're going to do a whole wall. That would make it a whole lot easier. So then you just place it in the tub, making sure the whole back gets wet. And then you're going to pull it out. Now, I did see someone else they took a roller. There's a dry spot right there. Let's get some water on it. They took they took a paint roller that was wet with water and they used that to wet the back. And what this is called is bookending. You're basically folding it upon itself, but you don't want to crease it right there. And then just fold it on itself. And then go like this. And they said let it soak for a minute before applying it. So what I'm doing is actually drawing lines where I want the seams to go, because there are those bars across that will cover, the shelves. So I'm just going ahead and you're going to place the first sheet down across that line that we had drawn where the shelves are going to sit, so you won't see that seam that goes horizontally across the back of the cabinet. I'm using a little squeegee to just make sure we get out all the air bubbles. And then with your second piece, we measure to fit into that center section, and then we're going to cut. Ideally, it probably would have been better to do this while it was dry, but I kind of came up with a different plan as I went along, and so be it. And then I'm using a rag to wipe off any of the excess paste that might be coming up through that seam, and water and whatnot as well. And it helps me to see any of the bubbles as well as rub out some of those bubbles too. And then go ahead and place your third piece on the same as you do the rest. You're just going to lay it down, get the seam really nice and even, and then smooth out all those bubbles with your hand. Now while that's drying, I went to my silhouette and I brought up the image that I wanted to use, and I blew it up to the size of the back of my piece. And I cut it out with, I have a Silhouette Cameo 4, and I placed it down where I wanted it. But first I butted that back up against the back of the cabinet, and I drew out where the shelves were, so I knew exactly where I wanted to put that stencil. I used Oracle 631. It's a removable type of vinyl to cut out my stencil. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to take some white paint, and we are going to go around all of the edges of the stencil. And what that does is kind of creates a barrier where the top color that we're putting on next doesn't seep up underneath that stencil. At least gives it a fighting chance. Anyways, with this textured wallpaper, there is more likelihood of it bleeding through, but we can touch that up after. So I grabbed some more of that custom sage green color, and that's what we're going to paint the entire back. I am kind of using a stippling motion around the stencil itself, and then I go ahead and just use regular brush strokes for the rest, just getting in there. This actually took 2 coats, but the wallpaper paints so nicely. I really want to use this again somewhere in my house. So it was just really awesome to work with. And then we're just peeling off that stencil now. And this is the super fun part, because you start to see that image come to life. Like I said, this is going to have a coastal theme. And so I used something that was, this is a bird in the grasses that we would see here in North Florida.
Now all the stencil is off, and there are a few places that I want to touch up, like here where the stencil didn't quite match up. And then of course up there, had a little snafu. It was right on the line where the seam was, and when I pulled up the stencil, it pulled up the wallpaper. So I gotta glue that back down. And then we're going to put a whitewash over the whole thing, a whitewash glaze, so that this is subtle and not super stark. So that's the next step.
And for some reason, I lost that footage. So just imagine applying some whitewash glaze and then wiping it back down with a rag to reveal the texture of the wallpaper. But what I'm doing here is painting a base coat of sandbar so that it actually creates texture by using the chip brush. I'm doing 2 coats of that, and then we'll apply the Van Dyke brown glaze. And that is where we're going to create that faux wood finish. We're just going to apply it just like you would paint, work in small sections, and then come back through with a hand broom. You can use a whisk broom. You can use I think there's even like a wallpaper type broom that you can get. This is just an inexpensive broom from Walmart. I've heard that there's one at a Dollar Tree. I tried, but they actually didn't have one there. So I'm using the one that I found at Walmart. It came with a dustpan and it was around $5. Not too bad. And it's reusable. So just, you can use it over and over again, right? Like I said, we're just doing a section at a time. This glaze actually is water-based, so it has a fairly short open time. So you really need to use it before it dries because you don't want it, once it's dry, it's stuck there and you got to kind of start over again. So I like to use all sides of the broom. So we're going to go across the piece, we'll say horizontally, and then we're going to flip it around and do it vertically as well. And that just gives you different kind of grain patterns. The other thing to note is that when you're going around the door and these frames around the glass sides, you want to make sure to keep the grain pattern consistent with the way that it naturally would go. So naturally, when the piece is horizontal, it would have a horizontal grain pattern, and where it's vertical, it would have the vertical grain pattern. And this is what we're trying to create here. I always do that sample piece. So make sure, just get a piece of scrap wood or whatever you have laying around and test out your colors first so that you know what exactly it is that you want. And you'll notice here how I'm kind of using that broom in all different directions to give you those different grain patterns. I've also taken a chip brush where I've kind of cut into the bristles a little bit to create a jagged pattern in the bristles. Again, just to create more of a pattern and just different, because wood grain is not all the same exact. So we're trying to create a faux finish that looks fairly realistic. There she is. This is the first step. I could have stopped right here, or I could have added, if I wanted a little more rustic look, a little more of that driftwood look, I could have added some gray glaze or maybe even some really dark brown glaze, but I chose white glaze to go over the top because I wanted that very coastal, clean, light and airy look. I wanted to lighten it up quite a bit. So we're just using that same exact technique, working in small sections, and we're going to go ahead and go back over it with that broom to really blend that in. Getting into that area between where the trim piece met the side of the cabinet was getting a little difficult, and that's where that chip brush that I had cut the bristles, that's where that came in handy. I kind of keep, if you've ever had your hair cut where they kind of come in at an angle on the blunt ends of your hair, that's what I did with the chip brush. I didn't cut it, straight across. And here, again, using a sample, this is what we're trying to create with this technique. And then you're just going to continue that process over the entire piece. I did mask off the inside of the door opening so that I didn't get any splatter, because as you drag that broom across, sometimes the glaze will kind of splatter. And you don't want to get that obviously inside. We don't want a speckled finish on the inside. So generally, you would put this glaze on and then wipe it back with a rag, like I did on the back panel, like I said earlier. But with this, we wanted to use that broom. Now we're going to go ahead and measure the bottom of the cabinet so that we can create a base and add some legs. Let's head outside and get that built. So I had these legs. They were actually on a sewing machine cabinet, and the sewing machine cabinet itself was all particle board, so it was trash. But the legs were awesome, and they already had the taper to them. And if you remember from my last project, cutting the tapering part was the hardest part. So I said, shoot, that's already done for me. So there we go. So I measured them to 12 inches because I want the cabinet to be 12 inches up off the ground. And so, yep, we're just going to cut them. So now I got to do some math. So I measured the width of the cabinet at 47 inches. So we got to take the width of this off of there, which is 1.5 inches. Yeah, I'm right at 1.5 inches. So 47 minus 3 would be 44. And then take another 1/2 inch off so that it's inset a little bit, 1/4 inch on each side. That's 44 minus 1/2 inch. That's 43.5 inches. So now we're just going to put pocket holes all along the top and then the two ends, so that the two ends can fasten the legs on each end and the top fastens to the bottom of your cabinet. The Craig jig that I am using is linked in the description, so you can just check that out there. It is the entry-level Craig jig, and I highly recommend it. It has worked wonderfully for me. Obviously, someday I'm probably going to splurge a little bit and upgrade, but this has worked great for me. I bought the clamp extra as well. Now we're just going to go ahead and fasten the legs to, this is the back piece. I found that if I got it started and fastened a little bit and then laid it down, and then I actually put a pencil underneath so that I could have the right spacing. It just something that you find whatever, and this is just what worked for me. So I actually used Tobacco Road and Au Natural stain on the legs and on the base that I built. That is the No Pain Gel Stain from Dixie Belle. So once the back had 2 legs attached to it and then the front had 2 legs attached to it, I then attached my sides. And that is what you're seeing right here. We're using the 1.5-inch Kreg screws. You need to use the appropriate screw length for the type of material that you're using. Then once those legs are attached, I clamped it to the bottom. I flipped the cabinet on its face and then clamped this entire base to the bottom of the cabinet, and now we're just screwing it in. Now I've placed the back onto the cabinet, and I'm noticing this bar that goes down the center of the shelves is just sticking out like a sore thumb. So I've tried some glaze to see if maybe that would help it to blend in, but it just doesn't quite look the same. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut some pieces of wallpaper. I'm going to paint them, glaze them, and then add them in. And hopefully it should be pretty easy with a razor blade, some little scissors, and my squeegee, of course. And actually, it was more daunting in my brain than it actually was in reality. The hardest part was really cutting it, just getting your hands in those particular. I felt like I was doing a little bit of yoga to kind of get some of those places where I had to cut it. But other than that, it really was super easy, and I think it added the absolute perfect finished professional, just custom looking touch to it. And now I'll just take some white paint and continue the design of the stencil up onto that center section. It took a few coats because I'm covering white over green, as well as then I added some glaze over the top because the glaze had a little bit of a different tint than the white paint. And now we have to seal the entire thing, and we're nearing the finish line, y'all. Like I said, this took quite a while. I probably should have stopped a couple techniques ago, but I really had a vision in my head, and well, I just had to follow through. So I'm using the Dixie Belle's Gator Hide to seal this piece because it has that nice, hard, durable, water repellent finish. And I'm just applying it with a brush. And now we can go ahead and add our door back on. Well, there she is, y'all. What do you think? I put a few staging items in there. If you notice, these items might be a little familiar because I grabbed them off my shelves in my living room. But I really like her. I added a little gold doorknob as well. And later on, I actually added a little bit of gold gilding wax to the hinges so it all matched. But there's the base and the finish. I think she came out really pretty and would look perfect in someone's beach house.
Can you believe that one china cabinet could turn into 2 amazing projects just with a little bit of skill, a little bit of persistence? It really turned into something, they turned into something beautiful and something that would normally just been trashed because we just don't have room for china cabinets anymore, not big old hutches like that. Anyways, so I think that we repurposed this to the best that it could be and really updated it, maybe gave it a little more of a traditional look, of course a little bit of coastal look. But so the bottom, I told you I was going to tell you what happened, where they ended up. So the bottom half resides in our family room and houses all of our grandbaby's toys. And then the top half I actually sold on Marketplace, and it went to a lake house up in Georgia. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please give us a thumbs up and be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't ever miss a video. Every subscriber means so much to a small growing channel like mine. So please, whenever you can, hit that subscribe button and invite some friends too as well. Bye-bye, y'all. See you next week as we finish this piece that's right behind me. I have another challenge that I have entered, and it's a doozy. So I'll be as surprised as to how it comes out as you do with this one. So come back next week so you can see how it turned out.